The first envelope disappeared before anyone even opened it. Ethan Walker stood at the small mail counter inside the military post office, watching the clerk stamp it with a loud thud. He smiled to himself as he imagined his mother unfolding the pages at her kitchen table. He pictured his younger sister laughing at the little sketch he'd added in the corner. He even imagined his older brother pretending not to care before secretly reading every word. "Family?" the clerk asked. Ethan nodded. "They'll be proud." "I hope so." 3 weeks later, another letter came back. Not because the address was wrong. Not because the mailbox was full. Someone had written 3 words across the front in thick black marker. "Return to sender." Ethan stared at the handwriting. He knew it immediately. It belonged to his brother, Ryan. His stomach tightened. He slowly opened the envelope. His own letter was still inside. Never unfolded. Never read. He stood alone beneath the buzzing fluorescent lights, trying to understand how the people he'd spent his whole life loving could ignore him so completely. He had no idea that years later, one forgotten letter would stop an entire television studio cold. Before the uniform, before the deployments, before the silence, Ethan had been the quiet kid in Cedar Ridge, Ohio. Their family wasn't poor, but every dollar mattered. His father worked long shifts repairing trucks at a local garage. His mother, Linda, cleaned offices during the evenings. Ryan, 5 years older, filled every room with confidence. He was captain of the football team, loud, funny, and everyone seemed to know his name. Ethan was different. He loved fixing broken radios. He spent weekends helping elderly neighbors repair lawn mowers and bicycles. He remembered birthdays. He noticed when people were lonely. His little sister, Emily, adored him. "If I ever get lost," she'd say while holding his hand, "you'll find me. Always." She believed it. So did he. But families change. Sometimes slowly. Sometimes all at once. Everything shifted after their father suffered a back injury. The garage let him go. Bills stacked across the kitchen counter. Arguments became part of dinner. Ryan blamed everyone except himself. Their mother worked even longer hours. Their father stopped talking. Ethan quietly picked up extra shifts after school stocking shelves at the grocery store. Every Friday he slipped part of his paycheck into the cookie jar above the refrigerator. He never said anything. One evening his mother noticed. "Did you put this money here?" Ethan shrugged. "We needed groceries." She smiled, but only for a second. Ryan walked in and laughed. "Look at Mr. Perfect trying to save the family. It's just money." "No," Ryan said. "It's attention." Their father didn't stop him. That silence hurt more than the words. By graduation, Ryan had moved away. He bounced between jobs, always chasing quick success. Ethan stayed. He attended community college while working construction. Every morning started before sunrise. Every evening ended with sore hands. One afternoon he drove past the Veterans Memorial downtown. An elderly Marine was helping clean the names engraved into the stone. Without thinking, Ethan pulled over. "You need a hand?" The old man smiled. "I never turned down help." For nearly 3 hours they scrubbed marble in complete silence. When they finished, the veteran finally asked, "Ever thought about serving?" Ethan looked at the rows of names. "I've thought about making my life matter." The old man nodded. "That's usually where it starts." 6 months later, Ethan enlisted. His mother cried quietly during dinner. His father stared at his plate. Ryan rolled his eyes. "So you're leaving us too?" "I'm trying to build something." "For who?" Ethan didn't answer. Emily squeezed his hand under the table. "When you write me," she whispered, "I'll write back." He smiled. "You better." Basic training nearly broke him. The first weeks felt endless. Blisters covered his feet. His shoulders ached. Sleep came in tiny pieces. Still, every Sunday evening he wrote. One letter to his parents. One to Emily. Sometimes another to Ryan. He never complained. Instead, He described sunsets over the training fields. Funny stories about recruits getting lost. The taste of terrible coffee. The stray dog that somehow wandered onto the base. He wanted home to feel closer. Weeks passed. Nothing came back. Nothing arrived either. No letters. No birthday card. No photographs. The silence felt heavier than the backpack he carried every day. One afternoon, another recruit named Marcus noticed. "You check that mailbox like somebody owes you money." Ethan forced a laugh. "I'm waiting on family." Marcus nodded slowly. "They all right?" "I hope so." Then came the first returned envelope. Returned to sender. Ryan's handwriting. Ethan told himself it had to be a mistake. So he wrote another. This one was shorter. "Just checking in. I miss everyone. Hope you're okay." 2 weeks later it returned. This time there was something new written beneath the address. "Stop pretending you care." Ethan read those 4 words until the ink blurred. Marcus quietly sat beside him. "You gonna tell me what happened?" "My brother thinks I abandoned them." "You did?" "I joined the army." Marcus smiled sadly. "Some people confuse leaving with giving up." Back home, the truth looked different. Ryan had moved back into their parents' house after another failed business venture. He handled the mail every afternoon. The first letter from Ethan arrived while their mother was still at work. Ryan stared at the envelope. Then tossed it into the fireplace. The second followed. Then the third. Eventually it became routine. Whenever another envelope appeared, he burned it before anyone else came home. When Emily asked if Ethan had written, Ryan answered before anyone could. "No." Their mother sighed. "I figured he'd forgotten us." Emily looked unconvinced. "He promised." Ryan shrugged. "People break promises." Their father remained silent. Silence became agreement. Months turned into years. Ethan deployed overseas. The desert stretched beyond the horizon in every direction. Dust settled into everything. The days blurred together. Some nights explosions echoed far away. Other nights were so quiet he could hear the wind brushing against abandoned buildings. Still he kept writing. Every holiday. Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every Mother's Day. Every Father's Day. Every letter ended the same way. "Love always, Ethan." Most returned. Some disappeared forever. He never understood why. He started keeping copies inside a worn notebook tucked beneath his bunk. "If they never read them," Marcus asked one night, "why keep writing?" Ethan stared at the notebook. "Because one day they'll know I never stopped trying." Back in Ohio, Emily graduated high school. She searched every room looking for old photographs of Ethan. Most had disappeared. Ryan claimed he'd packed them somewhere. She didn't believe him. Late that night she found one picture tucked inside an old dictionary. It showed Ethan carrying her on his shoulders at the county fair. Across the back he'd written years earlier, "No matter where life takes me, you'll never walk alone." She cried quietly so no one would hear. The next morning she asked again, "Has Ethan called?" Ryan didn't even look up from breakfast. "No." Their mother simply whispered, "I guess he has his own life now." Emily wanted to argue. Instead, she walked outside. Something felt wrong. She just couldn't prove it. Thousands of miles away, Ethan received heartbreaking news. His father had suffered another serious injury. The message came through a Red Cross notification. Emergency leave was approved. After nearly 4 years away, Ethan finally boarded a plane home. His heart raced the entire flight. He imagined surprising everyone. Maybe the letters had been lost. Maybe phones had changed. Maybe there had been misunderstandings. Families survived misunderstandings. Didn't they? Rain poured over Cedar Ridge the evening he arrived. He stood outside the small house carrying one duffel bag. The porch looked smaller than he remembered. The old swing still creaked in the wind. Warm light spilled through the living room window. He smiled. Home. He knocked once. Footsteps approached. The door opened. His mother looked directly into his eyes. For a long second she didn't speak. Then her face hardened. "What are you doing here?" Ethan blinked. "I came as soon as I heard about Dad." Her expression didn't soften. "You don't get to disappear for years, and suddenly pretend you're part of this family." The words struck harder than anything he'd faced overseas. Behind her, Ryan appeared in the hallway. A slow smile spread across his face. And before Ethan could say a single word, Ryan looked their mother in the eye and quietly said, "See? I told you he'd only come back when he wanted something." Ethan stood frozen on the porch as rain soaked through his jacket. Water dripped from the edge of the roof between him and the family he barely recognized. "I don't want anything," he said quietly. "I just came to see Dad." His mother crossed her arms. "For years, Ethan. I wrote." Ryan laughed. "No, you didn't. I wrote every week. No one got a single letter." The words hit Ethan like another punch. He looked from his mother to his father, who now appeared in the hallway, leaning heavily on a cane. His father's face looked older than Ethan remembered. His shoulders had shrunk. His hair was almost completely gray. "Ethan," his father whispered. For a moment, Ethan thought everything would be okay. Then his father lowered his eyes. "If you wanted to be part of this family," he said softly, "you should have stayed." The door closed. Not slammed. Just closed. Ethan stood there until the porch light clicked off. The motel on the edge of town smelled like old carpet and stale coffee. Marcus answered Ethan's call on the second ring. "You made it home?" "I don't think I did." "What happened?" "They think I abandoned them." Marcus stayed quiet. Finally he asked, "Did you tell them about the letters?" "They said they never got any." Neither man spoke for several seconds. Then Marcus asked one question. "Who got the mail?" Ethan slowly closed his eyes. "Ryan." The next morning Ethan walked through Cedar Ridge before sunrise. Almost nothing had changed. Mrs. Donnelly still opened her bakery at 6. Mr. Harris still swept the sidewalk outside the hardware store. People recognized Ethan immediately. "Ethan?" He turned. Mrs. Donnelly hurried across the street and wrapped him in a hug before he could react. "Oh my goodness! I've missed your cinnamon rolls." She smiled through watery eyes. "We've missed you." He frowned. "You have?" "Of course. I thought everyone believed I disappeared." She looked confused. "We heard you were serving overseas." "You knew?" "The whole town knew." His heart skipped. "My family didn't." Mrs. Donnelly hesitated. "I always wondered why your mother never mentioned your letters." "My letters?" "The mailmen used to joke that nobody wrote home as much as you." Ethan's stomach tightened. The mailman. Someone else had seen them. Frank Dawson had delivered mail in Cedar Ridge for 32 years. He was retired now. Ethan found him sitting on his front porch feeding birds. Frank smiled the moment he recognized him. "Well, I'll be. You remember me?" "I remember every kid on my route." Ethan sat beside him. "I need to ask you something." Frank nodded. "You mailed dozens of letters home while you were gone." "I did. I delivered every single one." Ethan stared at him. "Every one?" Frank nodded slowly. "Never missed." "What happened after that?" Frank rubbed the back of his neck. "I usually handed them to your brother." "Ryan." Again. Frank's expression changed. "There was one thing that always bothered me." "What?" "Sometimes I'd see smoke coming from that old burned barrel behind your parents' garage only a few minutes after I left." Ethan's chest tightened so hard he could barely breathe. He suddenly remembered Ryan volunteering to take out the trash every afternoon. He remembered the smell of smoke whenever he'd come home from school years earlier. Pieces were falling into place. But he still had no proof. Emily nearly dropped her grocery basket when she saw Ethan walking into the supermarket. For 2 seconds she simply stared. Then she ran. She threw her arms around him so hard they both almost fell over. "You came back." He hugged her just as tightly. I never left you. She pulled away, tears already running down her face. I thought. I know. They sat together in a small park nearby. For nearly an hour neither wanted to interrupt the other. Finally Ethan asked the question he'd carried for years. Did you ever get even one letter? Emily slowly shook her head. I waited. I wrote hundreds. I know you would have. She wiped her eyes. I used to check the mailbox before school. Ethan reached into his backpack. He pulled out his worn notebook. Every page held copies of letters he'd written. Emily carefully opened the first one. It was dated 4 years earlier. Her hands began shaking. You remembered my science fair. You won second place. You remembered my birthday. I remembered all of them. She couldn't stop crying. For the first time in years, someone from his family believed him. That evening Emily confronted Ryan. She placed the notebook on the kitchen table. What is this? Ryan barely glanced at it. I don't know. They're Ethan's letters. So? He has copies. Ryan shrugged. Anybody can write fake dates. Emily slammed the notebook shut. You lied. I protected this family. From what? From him. Their mother looked up from washing dishes. What are you talking about? Emily turned toward her. Ethan wrote us every week. Ryan interrupted instantly. Don't be stupid. He has proof. Ryan laughed again. A notebook isn't proof. Linda looked between them. Enough. But she didn't sound convinced anymore. That was the first crack. Small. Almost invisible. But it was there. Days passed. Ethan extended his leave to help care for his father. His mother refused to let him inside the house. So every morning he quietly mowed the lawn. He repaired broken fence posts. He fixed the leaking porch steps. He left before anyone woke up. His father noticed first. One morning he opened the curtains and watched Ethan replacing loose shingles on the garage roof. Ryan walked into the room. What are you looking at? Your brother. Ryan frowned. He wants people to feel sorry for him. Outside, Ethan climbed down the ladder. Without knocking, he simply placed a bag of fresh groceries beside the front door and walked away. His father watched the entire thing. He said nothing. But something inside him shifted. A week later a violent summer storm rolled across Cedar Ridge. Wind snapped tree branches like toothpicks. Power lines crashed into the street. Rain flooded half the neighborhood. Near midnight Emily called Ethan. Dad's trapped. Ethan didn't ask questions. He drove straight there. A giant oak tree had collapsed across the garage, blocking the only wheelchair ramp recently built for his father. Water was pouring into the basement. Ryan stood outside yelling into his phone. They're saying emergency crews are backed up. Ethan ran past him. We don't have time. For the next hour he worked without stopping. He cut away heavy branches with a chainsaw borrowed from a neighbor. He carried his father through waist-deep water. He shut off the main electrical panel seconds before floodwater reached it. By the time firefighters finally arrived, the family was already safe. One firefighter looked around in surprise. Who handled this? Ryan opened his mouth. Before he could speak, 3 neighbors answered at once. Ethan. The firefighter nodded toward Ethan. You probably saved 3 lives tonight. Ethan simply looked down. I just did what anyone would have done. His mother stared at him from the ambulance. She wanted to say thank you. Instead she whispered nothing. Because guilt had already begun speaking louder than words. The following afternoon, Frank Dawson knocked on Ethan's motel door. I found something. He held an old metal box covered in dust. I almost threw it away when I cleaned my garage. Inside were dozens of photographs from neighborhood events over the years. Near the bottom sat one faded picture. Frank pointed. I took this by accident. The photo showed him handing a bundle of envelopes to Ryan beside the family mailbox. The date stamp matched Ethan's deployment. Ryan was smiling. And tucked under his arm were at least 8 unopened letters addressed in Ethan's handwriting. It wasn't enough to prove what happened after. But it proved one thing. The letters had arrived. Every single one. Ethan stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he quietly folded it and slipped it into his notebook. He finally had the beginning of the truth. He just didn't know that somewhere inside his parents' old garage, hidden beneath years of dust and ashes, one letter had somehow escaped the fire. And that forgotten envelope was about to change every life in the Walker family forever. The morning after the storm, the Walker family stood in silence as contractors inspected the damaged garage. Most of the roof had to come down. Water had soaked the walls. The old wooden shelves were swollen and beginning to collapse. One worker kicked aside a rusted metal barrel sitting in the corner. "What do you want us to do with this?" Ryan answered too quickly. "Throw it out." The man tipped it over. Gray ash spilled across the wet concrete floor. Mixed into the ashes were dozens of tiny pieces of burned envelopes. Some still carried faded stamps. Some still showed the first few letters of Ethan's name. Linda slowly stepped forward. "What is that?" Ryan didn't answer. One of the workers reached deeper into the barrel. "Hold on." He pulled out something wrapped inside a melted plastic storage sleeve. It was black around the edges. Water-stained. But somehow untouched in the center. An envelope. Still sealed. Addressed to the Walker family. Linda's hand started shaking before she even picked it up. The postmark was almost 4 years old. She looked at Ryan. His face had gone completely pale. "Where did this come from?" Ryan swallowed. I don't know." Nobody believed him. The family gathered around the kitchen table. The room was silent except for the ticking wall clock. Linda carefully opened the envelope. Inside were 4 handwritten pages. She recognized Ethan's neat handwriting immediately. Her voice trembled as she began reading. "Hi, Mom. Basic training is harder than I imagined, but every morning I remind myself why I came. Dad always taught me that when something is worth doing, you finish it. I still hear him saying those words whenever I want to quit. Emily, I hope your science project wins. I wish I could help you build it. Ryan, I know we haven't always understood each other. But I hope one day we can start over. Please tell Dad I'm proud to be his son. I miss all of you every single day. Love always, Ethan." The room fell completely still. Emily covered her mouth. Their father slowly removed his glasses. Linda stared at the pages as tears splashed onto the paper. Ryan looked toward the front door. For the first time in years, he looked afraid. The lies collapsed faster than anyone expected. Linda turned toward him. "You burned them." "No. You burned everyone." You let us believe our son abandoned us." Ryan slammed both hands onto the table. "I was trying to protect this family." Emily stood. "From love?" Ryan's voice cracked. "You don't understand." "Then explain." For several long seconds he couldn't speak. Finally the truth came out. "When Ethan enlisted, Mom cried every night." Linda looked at him in disbelief. "I hated him for making her hurt." "You hated him?" Ryan nodded. "He was always the good one." "No," Linda whispered. "He was simply kind." Ryan stared at the floor. "I kept thinking, if nobody heard from him, eventually we'd stop waiting. Instead, the waiting had lasted 4 years. Ryan was arrested 2 weeks later. Not for burning letters, but because investigators discovered he'd been cashing military support checks Ethan had mailed home to help his parents. Several envelopes had contained money orders. Ryan had forged signatures. The fraud stretched across years. Even Ethan hadn't known. Federal investigators became involved. The evidence was overwhelming. Ryan accepted a plea agreement. Before leaving the courtroom, he looked once at Ethan. "I'm sorry." Ethan nodded gently. "I know. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the beginning." Life slowly found its way back together. Linda spent weeks reading every copy Ethan had saved. She read one each night. Sometimes two. Sometimes she cried before reaching the second page. Sometimes she laughed at stories about terrible military food or stray dogs following Ethan around base. She realized she hadn't lost 4 years. She'd simply never been allowed to see them. Every letter became another missing day returned. Their father changed too. One quiet afternoon he asked Ethan to help repair the old porch swing. Neither man spoke much. They didn't need to. After tightening the final bolt, his father finally broke the silence. "I failed you." Ethan looked at him. "I should have asked questions. You were hurting too." His father shook his head. "I chose silence because it felt easier." He looked out across the yard. "Silence has a price." Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're still here." His father nodded slowly. "Thanks to you." Months later, Emily convinced Ethan to share his story publicly. At first he refused. "I don't want revenge." "It's not revenge." "What is it?" She smiled. "It's truth." A producer from a national morning television show heard about the story through a local newspaper. They invited Ethan and his family for an interview during Military Family Appreciation Week. Ethan almost declined. Then he remembered something Marcus once told him. "Sometimes the truth isn't for you. It's for the people still living the lie." So he accepted. The studio lights were brighter than Ethan expected. The audience applauded politely as the interview began. The host listened quietly while Ethan described writing letters every Sunday. Linda spoke through tears about believing her son had forgotten her. Emily held Ethan's hand the entire time. Near the end of the interview, the host smiled gently. "We have something we'd like to do." She reached beneath her desk. "In your recovered letter, Ethan wrote that every word came from hope." She held up another envelope. "This morning, we asked people across America to write letters to someone they've been meaning to thank." The audience applauded as volunteers wheeled in hundreds of mailbags. Teachers, firefighters, nurses, veterans, parents, children. Thousands of handwritten letters had arrived overnight. The host looked toward Ethan. "We hoped one family story might remind the country that words still matter." Ethan couldn't speak. Then the host unfolded Ethan's rescued letter. She asked quietly, "May I?" He nodded. The studio became completely silent. She read every word exactly as Ethan had written it 4 years earlier. No music played. No cameras moved. Even the audience seemed afraid to breathe. When she reached the final sentence, "Love always, Ethan," the room stood together. Not because anyone asked them to. Because they wanted to. Many people were crying openly. Several veterans saluted. One elderly woman in the front row wiped her eyes before whispering, "I wish my son had written one more." The broadcast spread across the country. Millions watched. The clip was shared by military families, teachers, postal workers, and parents. People began posting photographs of old handwritten letters they'd saved for decades. A non-profit organization contacted Ethan with an idea. Together they created a campaign called Letters Last Forever. Its mission was simple. Encourage families to write one real letter each month to someone they love. Schools joined. Veterans groups joined. Retirement homes joined. Thousands of children wrote to grandparents. Parents wrote to sons and daughters serving overseas. Some letters crossed oceans. Others crossed only town. But every one carried something a text message never could. Time. Care. Presence. One autumn afternoon, nearly a year later, Ethan visited Marcus. His friend had recently retired from the army. They sat beside a quiet lake with fishing poles resting against the dock. Marcus smiled. "So, yeah? Still writing letters?" Ethan laughed. "Every Sunday." "Anybody writing back?" Ethan reached into his jacket. He pulled out a thick bundle tied with blue ribbon. "My mailbox finally caught up." Marcus laughed so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. That evening Ethan returned home. Not the old house. A small white farmhouse a few miles outside town. Emily's children were racing across the yard chasing fireflies. Linda sat on the porch knitting. His father slowly rocked in the swing they had repaired together. As Ethan walked toward the house, his father called out. Mail came. Ethan smiled. Anything important? His father held up a single envelope. It depends. On what? He handed it over. The handwriting on the front belonged to Linda. Ethan opened it. Inside was only one sentence. Thank you for never giving up on us. He looked toward the porch. His mother smiled through tears. This time, no one burned the letter. No one hid the truth. No one stood alone outside a closed door. Because sometimes a family isn't saved by the words they speak. Sometimes it's saved by the words that refuse to disappear. And long after the television cameras were gone, after the headlines faded and the applause became a memory, one simple habit remained in the Walker family. Every Sunday evening, before dinner, someone walked to the mailbox. Not because they expected something extraordinary, but because they had learned that love is often carried inside an ordinary envelope. And every letter that arrived was opened together.